The date is May 5th, 1945. The place is Okinawa, Japan. And hell has opened its gates. The cliffs of Hacksaw Ridge rise 400 feet into smoke-choked sky. Every inch of that ancient rock face is now soaked in blood, scorched by fire, and carved by explosions that shake the earth like the fists of angry gods. Bullets don't just fly here. They hunt. They slice through the humid Pacific air with the precision of surgical blades, searching for flesh, for bone, for life to extinguish. Artillery shells scream overhead, their wails almost human, almost pleading, before they detonate in eruptions of dirt, shrapnel, and bodies torn apart. Men are screaming. Some fall and do not rise. Some cling to jagged rocks with fingers slippery with their own blood. Some simply freeze, paralyzed by a terror so complete that their minds shut down, surrendering to death before death even arrives. The smell is overwhelming, cordite, burning flesh, earth turned inside out. This is not war as it exists in movies or textbooks. This is war as it truly is, chaotic, merciless, and utterly indifferent to courage or cowardice, to guilt or innocence. And through this inferno, one figure moves with deliberate, almost impossible calm. No rifle slung across his back, no grenades clipped to his belt, no pistol holstered at his hip, only a stretcher, only bandages, only faith. His hands are steady even as the ground beneath him erupts. His eyes are clear even as smoke blinds those around him. His voice is soft but commanding as he whispers to wounded men who have given up hope. This is Desmond Thomas Doss, the unarmed medic, the man who would not kill, the soldier who would redefine what it means to be a hero on the bloodiest cliffs the Pacific War had ever known. To understand what Desmond Doss walked into, you must first understand Okinawa. By early 1945, World War II had been raging for 6 brutal years. Europe was collapsing under Allied pressure. Germany was crumbling. But in the Pacific, the Japanese Empire remained defiant, entrenched, and willing to sacrifice everything. Okinawa was the key. A strategic island, barely 60 miles long, positioned like a dagger pointed at the Japanese homeland. Control Okinawa, and the path to Tokyo lay open. But the Japanese knew this too. They had transformed the island into a fortress. Caves honeycombed the cliffs. Tunnels twisted through the limestone like arteries through flesh. Hidden artillery positions turned every hill into a death trap. And the soldiers defending it had been told, retreat is not an option. Surrender is not acceptable. Death is preferable to dishonor. The Americans called Okinawa the Typhoon of Steel. It was the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater. Nearly 550,000 troops participated. The fighting lasted 82 days. By the time it ended, over 12,000 Americans were dead. Another 38,000 were wounded. Japanese casualties, military and civilian combined, exceeded 100,000. Every yard of ground was purchased with blood. Every hill was a cemetery in waiting. Every dawn brought fresh horror. And into this, Desmond Doss carried no weapon but his faith. People ask, why would a man volunteer for war if he refused to kill? The answer is simple, and yet profound. Desmond Doss believed that while killing was a sin, allowing others to die when you could save them was an even greater one. He would not take life, but he would risk his own, again and again, to preserve it. Desmond Thomas Doss was born February 7, 1919, in Lynchburg, Virginia. The world he entered was still reeling from the First World War, a conflict so devastating that people called it the war to end all wars. They were wrong, of course. But in that brief window of hope, families like the Dosses tried to rebuild. His father, Thomas, was a carpenter, a quiet, hard-working man who struggled with the bottle and the demons left behind by his own wartime service. His mother, Bertha, was the moral anchor of the family, a devout Seventh-day Adventist whose faith was not merely a Sunday ritual, but a living, breathing guide for every decision, every action, every moment. The Adventist Church taught discipline, humility, and adherence to the 10 Commandments. And one commandment stood above all others in young Desmond's mind: "Thou shalt not kill." It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a guideline open to interpretation. It was absolute. As a boy, Desmond absorbed this teaching like sunlight absorbed by soil. It grew roots deep within him, becoming inseparable from his identity. One story shaped him more than any other. When Desmond was young, he and his brother Harold got into a heated argument. Boys being boys, fists flew. But the fight escalated. Desmond grabbed a brick. Rage blinded him for just a moment. A single, terrible moment, and he struck his brother in the head. Harold collapsed, blood pouring from the wound. Desmond stood frozen, the brick still in his hand, horrified by what he had almost done. If the blow had landed differently, if the angle had been just slightly altered, he could have killed his own brother. That moment never left him. From that day forward, Desmond Doss vowed he would never take a life. Not in anger, not in war, not ever. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. The Japanese surprise attack killed over 2,400 Americans and shattered the illusion of safety the United States had clung to. Overnight, the nation transformed. Young men flooded recruitment centers. Factories retooled for war production. The entire country mobilized. Desmond Doss felt the call too. But his response was unlike anyone else's. He would enlist. Not to fight, but to heal. Not to destroy, but to save. He registered as a conscientious objector and volunteered for service as a combat medic. His decision baffled nearly everyone. Friends questioned his patriotism. Strangers accused him of cowardice. Even Dorothy Schutte, the woman he loved and would eventually marry, struggled to understand. But Desmond was resolute. His faith was not a shield to hide behind. It was a sword he would carry into the heart of battle, not to kill, but to protect. He reported for basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, in April 1942. And that's where the real battle began. Boot camp was designed to break men down and rebuild them as soldiers, as killers, efficient and unquestioning. But Desmond Doss could not be rebuilt in that image. He refused to carry a rifle. He refused to train on Saturdays, his Sabbath, a day of rest commanded by his faith. His fellow recruits saw him as a liability. Drill instructors saw him as insubordination incarnate. They mocked him. They called him a coward. They placed his boots outside in the rain so they'd be soaked and uncomfortable. They assigned him the worst details: latrine duty, kitchen patrol, anything to break his spirit. One night, a group of soldiers cornered him, fists clenched, intent on beating sense into him. But Desmond did not fight back. He did not raise his hands in anger. He simply stood there, absorbing their blows, his eyes calm, his voice steady. And slowly, inexplicably, something shifted. The punches lost their fury. The jeers turned hollow. Because in the face of such unshakable conviction, violence revealed itself as impotent. Officers tried to discharge him. They argued he was unfit for service, a disruption, a danger to morale and unit cohesion. But Desmond refused to leave. He had volunteered. He had taken an oath to serve. And he would honor that oath, even if it meant enduring hell on earth before ever seeing combat. Eventually, against all odds, the army relented. They could not break him. They could not discharge him. So they sent him to war. Desmond Doss's first taste of combat came on Guam in July 1944. The island was a fortress. Japanese soldiers dug into caves and jungle, launching ambushes with ruthless efficiency. Desmond moved through the chaos without a weapon, his medical bag his only defense. When bullets flew, he did not dive for cover. He ran toward the wounded. He pulled men from no man's land, dragged them to safety under fire, stitched their wounds with hands that never trembled. Soldiers who had once mocked him now watched in awe. On Leyte, in the Philippines, the fighting intensified. Jungle warfare meant close quarters, sudden violence, and death that came from shadows. Desmond moved through it all like a ghost, untouchable, his presence both eerie and comforting. Men began to believe he was protected by something beyond luck. They whispered that God's hand shielded him. And maybe they were right, because by the time his unit shipped out for Okinawa, Desmond Doss had earned something rarer than medals: trust. The same men who once wanted him gone now wanted him near. Because in a war where death was guaranteed, Desmond Doss was the one man who promised life. April 29, 1945. Desmond's unit, the 77th Infantry Division, receives orders to take Hacksaw Ridge, a sheer escarpment overlooking the Urusomura area. The name is fitting. The cliffs are 400 feet of jagged rock, and the Japanese have turned the summit into a killing field. The ascent is a nightmare. Cargo nets are strung up the cliff face, and soldiers climb in full gear while Japanese soldiers rain grenades, bullets, and artillery down upon them. Men fall, tumbling backward, their screams swallowed by explosions. Desmond climbs with the rest, unarmed, his medical kit bouncing against his back. The top of the ridge is worse. It's not a battlefield, it's a slaughterhouse. Machine gun nests are hidden in spider holes, snipers perch in trees, mortars shriek overhead. The earth is torn open, exposing roots, rocks, and bones. American forces gain a foothold, barely, and dig in. But holding Hacksaw Ridge is like holding water in clenched fists. And then comes May 5th. The counterattack. The Japanese launch a massive counteroffensive. Wave after wave of soldiers pour over the ridge. Artillery rains from hidden positions. The Americans are surrounded, cut off, overwhelmed. The order comes: retreat, fall back, evacuate the wounded, regroup at the base of the ridge. Men scramble toward the cargo nets, desperate to escape, but dozens are left behind, wounded, trapped, unable to move. And Desmond Doss does not retreat. While his entire unit descends the cliffs, he stays. Alone, unarmed, surrounded by death. He moves through the smoke and fire like a man possessed. He finds a soldier pinned under debris and digs him free with bare hands. He fashions a rope sling from discarded gear and lowers men over the cliff's edge one by one to the medics waiting below. He prays between each rescue, a simple, desperate mantra: "Lord, please help me get one more." One more. And then another. And another. Bullets crack past his head. Shrapnel tears through his uniform. Grenades explode close enough to knock him off his feet. But he gets back up. He finds a man with his legs shattered and drags him 30 yards to safety. He applies tourniquets with shaking, bloodied hands. He whispers words of comfort to men who are dying, men who will not make it home, men who need to hear that they are not alone. Hours pass. The sun sets. Darkness falls. And still, Desmond Doss does not stop. By the time he finally descends the ridge, he has saved 75 men. 75 lives pulled from the jaws of death. 75 miracles. The soldiers who witness it can barely believe what they've seen. Some call it divine intervention. Some call it impossible. But all of them call it heroism in its purest form. A man who refused to kill had become the very reason so many would live to see another day. Desmond Doss did not escape Okinawa unscathed. On May 21st, just weeks after his heroics at Hacksaw Ridge, he was severely wounded. A grenade exploded near him, shredding his legs with shrapnel. He treated his own wounds, then waited 5 hours for stretcher bearers to reach him. When they finally arrived and began carrying him to safety, a sniper's bullet shattered his arm. He rolled off the stretcher, insisting the bearers take another wounded man first. He crawled 300 yards to an aid station, using a rifle stock as a splint for his shattered arm. He would spend 5 years recovering, enduring 17 surgeries, losing a lung and 5 ribs to tuberculosis contracted from unsanitary conditions during his treatment. But he never lost his faith. And he never regretted his choices. The body had been broken, torn apart by the machinery of war, but the spirit, the unshakable core of the man, remained whole. In hospital beds and recovery wards, when pain racked his body and sleep would not come, Desmond would close his eyes and see those faces, the 75 men, the ones who made it home because he refused to leave them behind. October 12, 1945. President Harry S. Truman stands in the White House, holding a light blue ribbon from which hangs a 5-pointed star. The Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration. Before him stands Desmond Doss, still recovering from his wounds, his body broken but his spirit undiminished. Truman drapes the medal around Desmond's neck and says words that would echo through history, "I consider this a greater honor than being president." Desmond Doss becomes the first conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor, not for killing, for saving. After the war, Desmond returned to Virginia. He lived a quiet life, far from the spotlight, working as a carpenter and raising a family with Dorothy. For decades, his story remained largely unknown. The world celebrated generals and bomber pilots, not medics who refused to carry guns. But those who knew him never forgot. Veterans would track him down, men whose lives he had saved, just to shake his hand and say thank you. And Desmond would smile, humble and uncomfortable with the attention, and remind them, "I was just doing my duty." He didn't see himself as extraordinary. He saw himself as a man who had simply lived according to his beliefs, who had refused to compromise his faith even when the entire world demanded it. He never sought glory. He never craved recognition. All he wanted was to serve, to heal, to prove that courage and conviction could coexist with compassion. And in doing so, he became a legend without ever trying to be one. Desmond Thomas Doss died on March 23, 2006, at the age of 87, but his legacy endures. In a world that often equates strength with violence, Desmond showed that true courage can exist without a single act of aggression. In a war defined by destruction, he proved that the greatest heroism is not in taking life, but in preserving it. He reminds us that conviction, real, unshakable conviction, can move mountains. That faith, when lived authentically, becomes a force more powerful than any weapon. And that sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is refuse to become what the world demands. His story challenges us to reconsider what we value. We build monuments to warriors who conquered nations, who commanded armies, who shaped the world through force. But how often do we honor those who heal, those who protect, those who risk everything not to destroy but to save? Desmond Doss stands as a reminder that heroism wears many faces, and sometimes the most powerful face is one that refuses to harm. Okinawa, 1945. The cliffs of Hacksaw Ridge stand silent now. The smoke has cleared. The screams have faded. The blood has long since washed away. But if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of a single prayer, whispered again and again through that long, terrible night. Lord, please help me get one more. One more life. One more soul. One more chance to prove that even in the darkest hour, humanity can prevail. Desmond Doss walked into hell armed only with faith. And he walked out a hero, not because he destroyed, but because he saved. And that, perhaps, is the truest definition of courage the world has ever known. His hands, which refused to take life, instead gave it back to 75 men who would have otherwise died on that ridge. His voice, which refused to shout hatred, instead whispered hope to those who had none left. His heart, which refused to harden in the face of war's brutality, remained soft enough to feel every loss, every wound, every moment of suffering, and still chose to act. The world will always remember soldiers who charged into battle with rifles blazing, but it should never forget the man who charged in with nothing but bandages and belief. The man who proved that you don't need a weapon to be a warrior. That courage isn't measured by how many lives you take, but by how many you're willing to die for. That sometimes the most revolutionary act in a world consumed by violence is simply refusing to participate in it. While still standing in the fire, still serving, still sacrificing everything. Desmond Doss. The soldier who would not kill. The hero who would not be broken. The man who taught us that faith, when carried with courage, can change the world, one life at a time.